The bright television studio buzzed with its usual morning energy as crew members rushed around making final preparations for another episode of The View. Coffee cups clinked against saucers, makeup artists touched up the hosts one last time, and camera operators adjusted their equipment with practiced precision. The familiar set gleamed under the powerful studio lights, creating that warm, inviting atmosphere that millions of viewers had come to associate with their daily dose of entertainment and discussion. Whoopi Goldberg sat in her designated chair, flipping through her notes while sipping her morning coffee. She had been doing this for years, and the routine had become second nature to her. The comfortable banter with her co-hosts, the carefully planned segments, the surprise moments that made for good television. It was all part of the carefully orchestrated dance that happened 5 days a week in front of a live studio audience, and millions of viewers at home. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the show had booked what seemed like a fairly standard guest for their military appreciation segment. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison was scheduled to appear as part of their ongoing series highlighting men and women in uniform. The booking had been arranged weeks in advance through the usual channels, with the publicity department providing basic talking points about his service record and recent ceremonial duties at various royal events on the green room just off stage. Staff Sergeant Harrison sat quietly in a comfortable chair, his uniform pressed to perfection. Every crease was sharp, every button polished, every detail attended to with the meticulous care that had been drilled into him during years of military service. His posture was naturally straight, not stiff or uncomfortable, but carrying that unmistakable bearing that marked him as someone accustomed to discipline and respect. The medallion on his chest caught the overhead lights as he adjusted his position slightly. To most people walking by, it would have looked like just another piece of military decoration, one of many colorful ribbons and medals that adorned the uniforms of service members. But this particular medallion carried weight far beyond its physical properties. It was the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, earned through months of active deployment in one of the world's most dangerous regions. Michael had received the call to appear on the show 3 weeks earlier. His commanding officer had suggested it, part of their public relations efforts, explaining that positive media coverage helped the public understand and appreciate the sacrifices made by military personnel. Michael had agreed, though television appearances were far from his comfort zone. He preferred the clear structure and purpose of military life to the unpredictable nature of live television. As he waited in the green room, Michael thought about the men who should have been sitting in similar chairs, receiving similar recognition. The faces of his fallen comrades flickered through his mind, as they did most days. Private Johnson, barely 19 when he enlisted, had dreamed of using his military benefits to become a teacher. He used to talk about wanting to coach high school basketball and help kids who reminded him of himself. That dream had ended on a dusty road outside Kandahar when an improvised explosive device claimed his life along with 2 other members of their patrol. Corporal Williams had been the father figure of their unit. Despite being only 25 years old, he carried wallet-sized photos of his twin daughters everywhere, showing them to anyone who would look. During their downtime, he would video call home and read bedtime stories to his girls, his voice carrying across continents through the miracle of modern technology. His daughters were now growing up without their father, their bedtime stories coming from recorded messages he had left behind. Sergeant Martinez had been the morale booster of their group, the one who could find humor in the darkest situations and lift everyone's spirits when the weight of their mission seemed overwhelming. He had a gift for impressions and could mimic everyone from their commanding officer to famous movie stars, often performing impromptu shows in their barracks that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. His laughter had been silenced by the same attack that claimed Private Johnson, leaving a hole in their unit that could never be filled. The production assistant knocked on the green room door, interrupting Michael's thoughts. 5 minutes, Sergeant Harrison, she said with a friendly smile. Michael nodded and stood automatically, checking his uniform one more time. The routine was ingrained in him. Inspect, adjust, present yourself with pride and dignity. These were more than just habits. They were manifestations of the respect he held for the uniform and everything it represented. As Michael walked toward the stage, he could hear the familiar sounds of live television production. The audience was settling into their seats, their excited chatter creating a backdrop of anticipation. Stage managers spoke quietly into their headsets, coordinating the complex dance of live broadcasting. The energy was infectious, and despite his nervousness about being on television, Michael found himself appreciating the professionalism and precision of the crew. The stage manager guided him to his position just off camera, explaining the basic logistics of the interview. He would be introduced by Whoopi, walk out to polite applause, take his seat in the guest chair, and then engage in what was expected to be a friendly, supportive conversation about his military service. The format was straightforward, designed to be comfortable for guests who might not be accustomed to television appearances. From his position in the wings, Michael could see the hosts taking their places at the iconic table. Whoopi Goldberg commanded attention even in casual conversation with her co-hosts, her personality filling the space around her. The other women at the table each brought their own energy to the mix, creating the dynamic that had made the show successful for so many years. The audience responded to their pre-show banter with laughter and applause, clearly enjoying the experience of being part of a live television taping. The floor director began counting down, his hand signals indicating the final moments before they went live to the national audience. Camera operators made final adjustments to their shots, sound technicians checked their levels one last time, and the entire studio seemed to take a collective breath before diving into another hour of live television. Michael felt the familiar calm that came over him in moments of importance. It was the same feeling he had experienced before important missions, before ceremonial events, before any situation that required him to represent something larger than himself. He straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and prepared to walk onto the stage as a representative of all the men and women who had served alongside him. The show's opening music filled the studio, and Whoopi began her introduction with the warmth and enthusiasm that had made her a beloved television personality. She spoke about the importance of recognizing military service, about the sacrifices made by service members and their families, and about the honor of having Staff Sergeant Harrison as their guest. Her words were genuine and respectful, setting what seemed like the perfect tone for a positive, uplifting segment. As his name was called and the applause began, Michael walked onto the stage with measured steps, his bearing proud but not arrogant, confident but not cocky. He represented not just himself in that moment, but every person who had ever worn the uniform, every family who had sacrificed for their country's service, and especially those who could no longer speak for themselves. The interview was about to begin, and none of them had any idea that this seemingly routine television appearance was about to become something extraordinary. The applause filled the studio as Michael walked across the polished floor toward the guest chair. His military boots made soft, measured sounds against the stage surface, each step deliberate and confident. The studio lights created a warm glow around him, highlighting the crisp lines of his uniform and the various ribbons and decorations that told the story of his years of service. The audience's welcoming response felt genuine, and Michael allowed himself a small smile as he approached the panel. Whoopi stood up to greet him, extending her hand with what appeared to be sincere warmth. "Welcome to the View, Staff Sergeant Harrison," she said, her voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone who had conducted thousands of interviews over the years. Michael shook her hand firmly, the way he had been taught during his early military training, making eye contact, and responding with a polite "Thank you for having me, Ms. Goldberg." The other co-hosts offered their own greetings as Michael settled into the guest chair. The furniture was comfortable but formal, positioned at just the right angle to facilitate conversation while ensuring the cameras could capture everyone clearly. Michael sat with the natural posture that came from years of military discipline, his back straight but not rigid, his hands resting comfortably on the chair's armrests. The conversation began in the traditional manner of daytime television interviews. Whoopi asked about his background, how long he had been serving, and what had drawn him to military life in the first place. Michael answered thoughtfully, explaining that he had enlisted shortly after high school, motivated by a desire to serve his country and gain the structure and purpose that military life provided. His responses were articulate but modest, displaying the kind of humble professionalism that often characterize career military personnel. "Tell us about your recent ceremonial duties," suggested one of the co-hosts, leaning forward with apparent interest. Michael explained that he had been selected for various honor guard responsibilities, including several high-profile events where military precision and bearing were essential. He spoke about the responsibility of representing not just himself but the entire military in these ceremonial roles, and how seriously he took that representation. The audience seemed engaged, nodding along as Michael described the rigorous training required for ceremonial duties. He explained how every movement had to be perfect, every uniform detail had to be flawless, and how the weight of tradition and honor rested on the shoulders of everyone selected for such roles. His words painted a picture of dedication and sacrifice that resonated with the viewers both in the studio and at home. As the interview progressed, the atmosphere remained pleasant and respectful. The co-hosts asked about military life, about the challenges of deployment, and about the transition back to civilian ceremonies after active duty. Michael answered each question with the measured thoughtfulness that characterized his personality, never seeming rushed or uncomfortable despite being in an unfamiliar environment. The conversation flowed naturally for nearly 10 minutes, touching on various aspects of military service and Michael's personal experiences. The audience laughed at appropriate moments when Michael shared lighter anecdotes about military life, and they listened intently when he spoke about more serious aspects of his service. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as the producers, who had planned. Then Whoopi's attention was drawn to something specific on Michael's uniform. Her eyes focused on the medallion positioned prominently on his chest. Among the other ribbons and decorations that adorned his military dress uniform, the Afghanistan campaign medal caught the studio lights in a way that made it particularly noticeable, its bronze color and distinctive design standing out against the dark fabric of his jacket. What happened next would later be analyzed and discussed by media critics, military advocates, and television viewers across the country. Whoopi, perhaps thinking she was making a light-hearted observation that would add some humor to the interview, gestured toward the medallion with a casual wave of her hand. Her expression carried the same playful energy that had characterized much of their conversation up to that point. "What's that little trinket there?" she asked, her tone carrying what she might have intended as gentle teasing. The words came out with a chuckle, as if she were commenting on a piece of costume jewelry or a novelty item picked up at a gift shop. "Looks like something you'd get from a cereal box," she added, seemingly unaware of the weight her words would carry. The change in the studio's atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. The easy, comfortable energy that had filled the space moments before seemed to evaporate instantly, replaced by something much more tense and uncertain. The other co-hosts exchanged quick glances, their expressions showing confusion and growing concern as they began to sense that something significant had just occurred. Michael's reaction was not immediately visible to the casual observer, but those trained to read military bearing could see the subtle shift in his demeanor. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle near his temple tensing in a way that suggested he was working to maintain his composure. His hands, which had been relaxed on the chair's armrests, moved to a more formal position, his fingers straightening and his posture becoming even more erect. The studio audience, which had been engaged and responsive throughout the interview, fell into an uncomfortable silence. Many of them sensed that something important had just happened, though they might not have fully understood the significance of Whoopi's comment about the medallion. The energy in the room shifted from warm and welcoming to uncertain and tense, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen but wasn't sure what that something might be. In the control room, producers and directors found themselves in unfamiliar territory. The interview had been proceeding smoothly according to their planned format, but now they were facing a situation that hadn't been anticipated in their pre-show discussions. Some whispered urgently to each other, trying to decide whether they should signal for a commercial break or allow the moment to play out naturally. One of the co-hosts, clearly sensing the shift in energy, attempted to redirect the conversation back to safer ground. "So, Staff Sergeant, tell us more about your training," she said, her voice carrying a slightly forced cheerfulness that suggested she was trying to move past whatever had just occurred. But her words seemed to hang in the air without gaining traction, as all attention remained focused on Michael and his reaction to Whoopi's comment. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every subtle detail of the unfolding moment. The camera operators, experienced professionals who had witnessed countless unexpected moments during live television, instinctively adjusted their shots to ensure they were capturing the full scope of what was happening. They could sense that this was no ordinary interview moment, and their training told them to be ready for whatever might happen next. Michael remained silent, his eyes fixed on Whoopi with an intensity that was both controlled and unmistakable. The seconds stretched on, each one building the tension in the studio to a level that was becoming almost unbearable for everyone present. The Afghanistan campaign medal continued to catch the lights, its significance now hanging over the entire interview like a storm cloud that everyone could see approaching but no one seemed able to prevent. The moment had been created, and there was no way to take it back or pretend it hadn't happened. The interview had taken a turn that none of the participants had anticipated, and everyone in the studio was about to discover just how profound the consequences of those few seemingly casual words would be. The silence stretched across the studio like a heavy blanket, wrapping everyone in an uncomfortable tension that seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. Michael continued to stare at Whoopi, his expression unchanged but his eyes holding a depth of emotion that made everyone in the studio acutely aware they were witnessing something far beyond typical television drama. The Afghanistan campaign medal on his chest seemed to gleam more brightly under the studio lights, as if demanding recognition for what it truly represented. Whoopi, perhaps beginning to realize that her comment had struck deeper than intended, shifted slightly in her chair. Her usual confidence appeared to waver as she met Michael's steady gaze. The playful smile that had accompanied her earlier comment began to fade, replaced by a growing awareness that she might have made a serious mistake. The other co-hosts remained frozen in their seats, uncertain whether to intervene or allow the moment to continue unfolding naturally in the control room. The tension was equally palpable. The director leaned forward in his chair, his hand hovering over the button that would cut to commercial break. His years of experience told him this was either going to be a disaster or something extraordinary, but he couldn't tell which. The producers whispered urgently among themselves, trying to decide how to handle a situation that none of their pre-show planning had prepared them for. The camera operators, sensing the gravity of the moment, made subtle adjustments to ensure they were capturing every nuance of what was happening. The lead cameraman zoomed in slightly on Michael's face, recognizing that whatever was about to happen would likely center on his response to Whoopi's dismissive comment. The lighting director ensured that the Afghanistan campaign medal remained clearly visible, though none of them yet understood the full significance of that particular decoration. Michael's hands, which had moved to a more formal position moments earlier, now gripped the arms of his chair with barely controlled intensity. Those familiar with military bearing could see he was drawing on years of discipline and training to maintain his composure. The muscle in his jaw continued to work as he processed not just Whoopi's words, but the casual dismissal of something that represented some of the most difficult and meaningful experiences of his life. The studio audience had grown so quiet that the ambient sounds of the building's air conditioning system became audible. Audience members looked at each other with confused expressions, sensing that something important was happening but unsure exactly what it was. Some leaned forward in their seats, instinctively understanding that they were about to witness something that would likely be talked about long after they left the studio. Finally, Michael moved, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Instead of an angry outburst or defensive response, he reached up with deliberate, careful movements and began to remove the medallion from his uniform. His fingers worked with the practiced precision of someone who had performed this action countless times, but never under circumstances like these. The motion was so deliberate and filled with reverence that it commanded the attention of everyone in the studio as he held the medallion in his palm. The studio lights caught its surface in a way that revealed details that hadn't been visible when it was pinned to his uniform. The bronze finish showed the wear of years of service, and the ribbon from which it hung carried the subtle fading that came from exposure to harsh environments and difficult conditions. In Michael's hands, it transformed from what Whoopi had called a trinket into something that clearly held profound meaning. "This trinket," Michael began, his voice cutting through the silence with a clarity that made everyone in the studio lean forward slightly. His words were measured and controlled, but they carried an undercurrent of emotion that was impossible to ignore. The way he pronounced the word trinket made it clear he was throwing Whoopi's dismissive language back at her, but without malice or anger. The other co-hosts exchanged glances that ranged from concerned to fascinated. They could sense that Michael was about to say something significant, and their years of television experience told them that whatever happened next would likely define not just this interview, but possibly their careers. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from casual entertainment to something approaching a moment of profound human truth. "This trinket was earned in the mountains of Afghanistan," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger but never losing its measured control. As he spoke, he turned the medal slowly in his palm, allowing the cameras to capture every detail of its design. The Afghanistan campaign medal's distinctive features became clearly visible. The bronze star and crescent that marked it as recognition for service in one of the world's most dangerous combat zones. The words "Mountains of Afghanistan" seemed to hang in the air, carrying weight far beyond their simple meaning. Everyone in the studio suddenly understood that they were no longer dealing with a casual television interview, but with someone's lived experience of war and sacrifice. The casual entertainment atmosphere that had characterized the beginning of the interview was completely gone, replaced by something much more serious and profound. Whoopi's expression had undergone a complete transformation. The confident, playful, a demeanor that had marked her earlier comments had disappeared entirely, replaced by a growing understanding of the magnitude of her mistake. Her eyes were fixed on the medal in Michael's hand, and for perhaps the first time since making her comment, she seemed to grasp that she had dismissed something of genuine significance and value. The camera operators continued their work with professional precision, but even they seemed affected by the gravity of the moment. The lead cameraman made sure to capture both Michael's face and the medal in his hand, understanding instinctively that both elements were crucial to whatever was unfolding. The lighting remained perfect, but somehow the entire visual composition of the scene had changed, becoming more serious and weighty. Michael's next words would prove to be even more powerful than his opening statement. "It represents 237 days of active combat," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through experiences that most people could only imagine. 237 days where every morning I woke up uncertain whether I would see another sunset. The numbers hit the studio like physical blows. 237 days of combat was not an abstract concept or a statistic from a news report. It was nearly 8 months of daily uncertainty, of constant danger, of living with the reality that each day might be the last. The audience members who had been confused earlier now began to understand the weight of what Whoopi had so casually dismissed. The silence that followed Michael's words was different from the earlier quiet. This was not the uncomfortable tension of an awkward moment, but the respectful silence of people who suddenly understood they were in the presence of someone who had experienced things far beyond their own knowledge or understanding. The Afghanistan campaign medal in Michael's hand had transformed from a cereal box prize into a symbol of sacrifice, service, and survival that demanded respect rather than mockery. The interview had reached a turning point from which there would be no return to casual banter or comfortable entertainment. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that would be remembered and discussed long after the cameras stopped rolling. The weight of Michael's words settled over the studio like a heavy fog that touched everything and everyone present. The Afghanistan campaign medal continued to rest in his palm, but now it seemed to glow with significance that had been invisible just moments before. Every person in that studio, from the camera operators to the audience members, suddenly understood they were witnessing something that transcended typical television entertainment. Michael's voice grew stronger as he continued. speaking, though it never lost the careful control that marked him as someone accustomed to choosing his words with precision. "This medallion carries the names of 7 men who didn't make it home," he said, lifting the medal slightly so the cameras could capture every detail of its worn bronze surface. 7 brothers who died protecting people they had never met, in a country most of them had never seen before they deployed. The impact of these words was immediate and profound. Several people in the studio audience could be heard drawing sharp breaths, and at least one person began crying quietly. The co-hosts sat in stunned silence, their usual quick responses and practiced television banter completely abandoned in the face of such raw honesty. Even the technical crew, usually focused entirely on their equipment and responsibilities, had stopped their work to listen. Whoopi's face had undergone a complete transformation since the interview began. The confident, sometimes dismissive expression she had worn earlier had been replaced by something approaching horror as she began to understand the full weight of what she had called a trinket from a cereal box. Her hands, which had gestured so casually toward the medal just minutes before, now lay still in her lap, as if she were afraid to move them. The cameras captured every nuance of the moment with professional precision, but even the experienced operators seemed affected by what they were recording. The lead cameraman had adjusted his shot to include both Michael's face and the medal in his hand, understanding instinctively that both elements were essential to the power of what was unfolding. The lighting, which had seemed perfectly adequate for a routine interview, now seemed almost reverent in the way it illuminated the scene. Michael continued his explanation with the methodical thoroughness of someone who wanted to ensure that every word was understood and remembered. "Every time I put on this uniform," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent studio, "I carry their memory with me. This cereal box prize represents Private Johnson, who was 19 and dreamed of becoming a teacher." The mention of Private Johnson's age sent another wave of emotion through the studio. 19 years old, was barely out of high school, younger than many of the production assistants working on the show. The idea that someone so young had died in service to his country while dreaming of teaching children gave concrete reality to what had previously been abstract concepts of military sacrifice. "He used to talk about wanting to coach high school basketball," Michael continued, his eyes never leaving Whoopi's face. "He said he wanted to help kids who reminded him of himself, kids who needed someone to believe in them." The personal details made Private Johnson real to everyone listening, transforming him from a statistic into a young man with hopes and dreams that would never be fulfilled. The studio remained completely silent as Michael moved on to the next name, Corporal Williams, who carried pictures of his twin daughters everywhere he went. His voice softened slightly as he spoke about the father who would never see his children grow up. During our downtime, he would video call home and read bedtime stories to his girls. His voice carried across continents through computer screens, bringing comfort to children who are now growing up without their father. Several members of the audience were now openly weeping, and even some of the production crew could be seen wiping their eyes. The co-hosts sat frozen, clearly understanding that they were witnessing something far beyond their usual television experience. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a moment of profound human truth that was unfolding in real time before millions of viewers. Sergeant Martinez was the one who could make anyone laugh even in the worst situations, Michael continued, and for the first time since beginning his response, a slight smile crossed his face. He had a gift for impressions and could mimic everyone from our commanding officer to famous movie stars. During the darkest moments, when the weight of our mission seemed overwhelming, he would perform these impromptu shows that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. The contrast between the laughter Sergeant Martinez had brought to his unit and the silence of his death created a poignancy that affected everyone present. Michael's smile faded as he returned to the reality of their loss. His laughter was silenced by the same roadside bomb that claimed Private Johnson and 2 others. 7 men in total, 7 brothers who should be here receiving recognition instead of me. The medallion in Michael's hand seemed to grow heavier with each name and story he shared. What Whoopi had dismissed as worthless decoration was revealed to be a memorial, a way of carrying fallen comrades into every ceremonial duty and public appearance. The bronze surface that had caught the studio lights so attractively was now understood to represent blood, sacrifice, and loss on a scale that most people could never imagine. In the control room, the producers had long since abandoned any thought of cutting to commercial or redirecting the interview. They understood they were capturing something extraordinary, a moment of television that would likely be studied and remembered for years to come. The director sat transfixed, his hand no longer hovering over the commercial break button, completely absorbed in what was happening on his monitors. Michael's voice remained steady as he shared more details about his fallen comrades, but everyone present could hear the emotion building beneath his controlled exterior. These were not distant memories or abstract concepts to him. They were daily companions, faces that appeared in his thoughts every morning when he put on his uniform, voices that echoed in his mind during quiet moments. Staff Sergeant Chen was our medic, Michael continued, his voice taking on an even more reverent tone. He saved more lives than anyone could count, always putting others before himself. When the attack came, he was treating wounded civilians, refusing to take cover until everyone else was safe. The heroism and selflessness that Michael described stood in stark contrast to the casual dismissal his medal had received just minutes earlier. The Afghanistan campaign medal caught the studio lights one more time as Michael prepared to return it to his uniform. The bronze surface that had seemed merely decorative when the interview began now appeared to glow with the memories and sacrifices it represented. Every scratch and mark on its surface told a story of service and loss that transcended anything that could be purchased or earned casually. As Michael carefully pinned the medal back to his uniform, the action carried more weight than any dramatic gesture could have achieved. The simple act of returning the decoration to its place of honor on his chest was both a conclusion to his explanation and a statement about the respect he held for what it represented. The interview had been transformed from routine television entertainment into something approaching a sacred moment, and everyone present understood that they had witnessed something they would never forget. The Afghanistan campaign medal was now back in its rightful place on Michael's uniform, but the atmosphere in the studio had been forever changed. The simple act of pinning the decoration back to his chest carried more dignity and power than any angry outburst could have achieved. Michael's movements were deliberate and respectful, treating the medal with the reverence it deserved, and everyone watching understood. They had just witnessed a masterclass in grace under pressure. When Michael looked up from adjusting his uniform, his eyes swept across the entire panel of co-hosts, but his gaze lingered longest on Whoopi. There was no anger in his expression, no desire for revenge or humiliation. Instead, there was something far more powerful, a quiet disappointment mixed with what might have been forgiveness. His face showed the weariness of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, but still maintained his dignity in the face of ignorance. The silence that followed was unlike anything that had ever occurred on The View's set. It was not the uncomfortable pause of an awkward moment or the brief quiet before someone jumped in with a joke or comment. This was a profound silence that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of the television studio, reaching into the homes of millions of viewers who sat transfixed by what they had just witnessed. It was the kind of silence that occurs when people realize they have been changed by an experience they will never forget. In the control room, seasoned television professionals found themselves wiping their eyes and struggling to maintain their composure. The director, who had witnessed countless dramatic moments during his decades in television, sat staring at his monitors with an expression of awe. His assistant directors and technical staff, usually bustling with activity and chatter during live broadcasts, had fallen completely silent, absorbed in the gravity of what they were capturing. The studio audience remained frozen in their seats, many with tears streaming down their faces, others simply staring in stunned silence at the man who had just shared such intimate details of loss and sacrifice. These were people who had come to the studio expecting entertainment, perhaps some light political discussion or celebrity gossip. Instead, they had received an education in the real cost of military service and the weight of true sacrifice. Michael finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly throughout the studio. "I have spent my entire adult life in service to others," he said, each word carefully chosen and delivered with quiet authority. "I have never asked for recognition or praise for doing what I believed was right and necessary. But I do ask for respect, not for me, but for those who can no longer speak for themselves." The power of these words seemed to settle over everyone present like a gentle but firm hand. Michael was not demanding an apology or seeking to humiliate anyone. He was simply asking for the basic respect that should be accorded to those who had paid the ultimate price for their service. His request was so reasonable, so dignified, that it made Whoopi's earlier comment seem even more thoughtless and hurtful by comparison. Whoopi, for perhaps the first time in her long television career, it appeared to be genuinely at a loss for words. Her usual quick wit and confident responses had completely abandoned her in the face of Michael's quiet dignity and the weight of the stories he had shared. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. She began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with finding the right words. "I had no idea," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea what that medal represented." Her apology was clearly heartfelt, but it seemed almost inadequate in the face of what had just transpired. "How do you apologize for dismissing the memory of 7 fallen soldiers as a trinket from a cereal box?" The other co-hosts remained silent, understanding instinctively that this was not their moment to speak. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had transformed their colleague, their guest, and quite possibly themselves. The usual dynamic of the show, where multiple voices competed for attention and airtime, had been replaced by a recognition that some moments demand silence and respect. Michael nodded slightly at Whoopi's apology, his expression showing neither satisfaction nor continued anger. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice maintaining the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire response. "I accept your apology, and I believe it comes from a genuine place. But I hope you understand that this conversation is bigger than just the two of us." His words carried a weight that extended far beyond the confines of the television studio. Michael was speaking not just to Whoopi, but to everyone watching, about the importance of understanding and respecting the sacrifices made by military personnel and their families. He was asking people to look beyond surface appearances and consider the stories and experiences that lay beneath. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every nuance of this unprecedented moment in television history. The technical crew worked with professional precision, but even they seemed affected by the gravity of what they were recording. Camera operators who had filmed countless interviews and segments found themselves moved by the quiet power of Michael's response and the transformation they had witnessed in real time. As the interview drew to its conclusion, Michael stood with the same measured dignity that had characterized his entrance onto the stage. His uniform remained perfect, every crease sharp, every decoration properly positioned. But now everyone understood that these were not merely decorative elements or symbols of military bureaucracy. They were stories, memories, and honors that carried the weight of real human experience and sacrifice. The studio audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. But it was not the usual enthusiastic clapping that typically accompanied the end of television segments. This was respectful, almost reverent applause, the kind reserved for moments of genuine significance. Many audience members continued to wipe tears from their eyes as they showed their appreciation for what Michael had shared with them. That as Michael walked off the stage, his footsteps echoing in the now quiet studio, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. This had not been just another television interview or celebrity appearance. It had been a moment of profound human truth, a lesson in dignity, respect, and the real meaning of service and sacrifice. The show would continue, other segments would follow, and the normal rhythm of daytime television would eventually resume. But for everyone who had been present in that studio, and for the millions of viewers who had watched from home, something fundamental had changed. They had seen what true grace under pressure looked like, and they had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to ignorance is not anger or retaliation, but quiet dignity in the sharing of truth. The Afghanistan campaign medal would continue to rest on Michael's uniform, but now it carried with it the knowledge that millions of people understood its true meaning. 7 fallen soldiers had been honored not through fanfare or ceremony, but through the simple act of one man standing up for their memory with courage, dignity, and quiet strength. The silence that had filled the studio at the end of Michael's response had spoken louder than any words ever could.